You guys can give us a call, by the way, and ask questions about. We're talking about cooling maintenance systems as well today, and we're thrilled to have Kevin back. Where did we last leave off? Was there stuff you left on the table you wanted to talk about, or do you want to give people the
Well,
30,000 foot view again?
well, I got to thinking about that, and I was like, it seemed like I talked a lot about it, but I never. I don't know. There were some things I felt like I missed and didn't cover. Maybe didn't stress enough. The importance of some of the things that we see in cooling systems on modern trucks. So
Let's give it a shot. Let's
I don't
give
know.
it.
I thought it would be a good chance to maybe go back over just a little bit.
I think it's a good idea, as a matter of fact. So let's go through some processes. The first thing you really want to do is select that right coolant, right? Let's just start with
Oh yeah,
kind of giving people the details of how they go about selecting the right coolant.
yeah, yeah. Well, for the most part, on most diesel engines, you're going to have extended life coolants with SCA packages added to it, because all we're really talking about is the chemistry of that coolant. That has to be maintained, to a level acceptable by the engine OEM and even the truck OEM, because there's so many pieces and parts. You've got your heater core, that's actually part of the truck. All of those lines and hoses and stuff, the DEF tank heaters, things like that. There's so much intertwinedness anymore. The cooling system is not just about the engine, even though that's the primary function, right? Is to keep the temperatures down in the combustion chambers. So, but when that chemistry level gets off, it becomes a bit of an imbalance there. It can really cause all sorts of issues. We don't see as much as we used to. Of course, coolants are refined and made to actually withstand so much more than they used to be. Back in the day, yeah, you were okay sometimes. To throw water in there when it was low and things like that. You really have to watch that type of stuff nowadays. I mean, it's better than nothing for sure. If you're in that jam, if you're, down, on the side of the road or things like that. But you got to remember, when you get back, it needs to be going to a shop. If you developed a leak on the road, and even a road service, may come out, and if the technician that comes out to make a repair, from a hose or something that may be blown, inquire with him, make sure, hey, what did you put, a 50-50 mixture of coolant, back in, what did you put in? Was it concentrated? Because even that, if it's just concentrated, that can cause problems, almost as many problems as just straight water. So you want to make sure, have it checked for sure.
I,
Once you get back to a better place.
and it brings up the point. We go back to being human. The idea that everything we design has a
Mm-hmm.
certain resemblance to us. And I made the analysis of Gatorade last time. It's so important, as you point out, to meet with the people who are in charge of the maintenance of your vehicle, of your living, and to make sure that you have a full understanding that you need to know the name of the best thing to put in there, because it's one of those things that sometimes water is the best you can do, but it better best be an emergency when you're doing that, and it better be with a temporary solution. It's almost like using water becomes like using a donut on a car. It's like, it's great for 50 miles, get to the shop, get the damn thing fixed.
Absolutely.
That's the absolute truth of the matter. You talked about a hose being blown, and I kind of wanted to bring up, and we're going through this in a very methodical way, because the conversation was loosey-goosey, Kevin, and I do apologize for that. But you got to check for leaks as well, correct? I mean, you've got to
Oh yeah,
consistently keep doing that, right?
yeah, and that's one of the things with checking for leaks is the simple walk around of the truck in the morning. If it's been shut off overnight, and you see, something's been dripping underneath, guess what? Something is leaking. right? So, so take a look at it. Now, the difference is this time of year, if you're idling overnight and you got the air conditioner on, you're going to see things dripping. You should see things dripping, and that should be water coming out of the air box for the air conditioning system. You've got to have that condensation running down out of the evaporator, because that's going to happen because you're exchanging heat out of the cab across the fins of the evaporator in there. So you get a lot of moisture drop out there, but that should be dripping really good, especially in humid climates. So, when it's really humid outside, there'll be lots of water dripping out from it. But it should just be water at that point, right? Not necessarily coolant or anything. So
you got to distinguish between dripping and leaking. The idea that is that content. Is the joke I always make is that simply the result of a glass of iced tea on an Alabama porch, or is there a hole someplace or a split someplace where in fact bad things are actually coming out of your truck as opposed to your truck just sweating, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I know it's not that time of year, but I will throw this out there as well. That chemistry level in your cooling system, when you do get it over concentrated, a lot of times we get what we call cold water leaks, especially with all the newer heater hoses and things like that, have a lot more silicone in them than they used to in years past. And what it is when if the coolant is too concentrated, for whatever reason, it'll actually interact with those hoses at the hose clamps and just seep out of there. Once it cools down, when it's hot, the silicone expands and everything's good and sealed. But what happens is it cools down, the molecules in those hoses contract so much that small amounts of coolant can seep out overnight. But usually that's seen more in cooler temperatures instead of what we're seeing today across most of the country, right? So,
right. Oh my God, it has been, I won't lie to you, dude. We are so thrilled. I keep on mentioning this. Those rainstorms. I was recording a video yesterday and was saying something sinister and I got a thunderclap. It doesn't scare me though. I have to tell you, we needed rain so badly down here, man, that it's like, it is so hot down here. And by the way, that's why we're having this cooling system maintenance conversation with our good friend Kevin Lindsey on Maintenance Matters. For those of you who are just joining us, and for the few of you who don't know who Kevin is, he's the manager of technical service at TravelCenters of America, and we're continuing a conversation that kind of rumbled, bumbled, and stumbled into more conversational nonsense than it did on cooling system maintenance. That's all due to me, by the way. I wanted to ask the question: you should be checking protection levels at every single service. This should be an ongoing commitment. This should be one of the reflexive things you always do, correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I'll be honest with you. If I'm an owner operator, it's my truck. I'm probably going to have a little bottle of test strips myself, and I'm going to test it myself on occasion. But that's just me. I would probably be a little bit anal. Now, that means there's somebody out there saying, wow, I bet he checks his own cars and trucks like that. No, I don't.
No.
I'm the typical mechanic. This is what I do for a living. It's not what I do in my spare time.
Kevin, I have to tell you, I literally, about a month before I change oil, I start having to have a conversation with myself for the entire month. I really got to change this oil. Every day I get in the car, I'm like, I really got to change this oil. I'll get around to it. While being on the air and telling people to check all the stuff they got to check, I keep telling myself, I'll get around to that. It'll be fun. Does that sound familiar, Kevin?
Yeah, just a little bit, Jimmy.
Oh my God. Let's talk about the grill front, by the way, and the radiator as well. Let's kind of dive into that.
Well, and really, as you're doing your walk around daily inspection or whatever, that's one of those things that I think gets overlooked. It gets assumed, because the grill looks like a grill. Some people have bug screens, behind the grill on the truck. Some trucks come with bug screens like that, But here's the thing: you got to remember your radiator on most big trucks is actually the third heat exchanger that the airflow gets to. Because typically the very first one is your condenser for your air conditioning, then a charged air cooler for the engine, and then the radiator. So just simply walking around the front, looking at the front of that grill, any amount of bugs or anything built up on there, which, Lord knows we all have those. And, God bless you if you run Florida, South Georgia, South Alabama this time of year with love bugs and everything. Oh my goodness, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. But, just be aware of that type of stuff. That needs to be cleaned off, because especially when it builds up somewhat, you're actually restricting airflow. And this time of year, that becomes even more critical, right? So,
Kevin, I have to tell you,
one of those.
I really quickly. I just made me think of. I went to Avery Island one time in Louisiana a long time ago. I was literally breathing mosquitoes. I'm not making a joke. I was literally breathing mosquitoes. It was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had in my life. I'm like, there's a lot. We got to get out of here. This is really bad. And you can imagine running through trucks through Southeast Louisiana. Same thing, man. Those bug grills are just done. They're set, especially as it gets into wetlands and all that stuff in the deep South. Wow.
Oh, that's I'll just say, in a former life, I spent a small amount of time in a little town called Dulac down there, south of Houma.
Oh man, it's real. And by the way, you can tell Kevin's actually spent time down there, because people ask me, "Is it Houma? Is it Houma?" I'm like, "No, dude, it's Houma. It's Houma. Just get rid of the U. It's Houma. It's Houma." And I know that neck of the woods, man. And that's deep. I mean, you're basically deep frying yourself. You're stepping into a deep fryer or a hot tub with bugs inside of it. It's terrific.
Yeah. You started talking about those Louisiana mosquitoes, and that's immediately where my mind went. I was like, I can remember sitting outside in the evening and just listening, and you could take like a pellet gun or something and start shooting them.
Oh yeah, and my dad always said he loved the sound of cicadas. Why? He said those SOBs eat the mosquitoes. He said when the sound of the cicadas when the sound of the cicadas got hot and heavy, you thought, oh, thank God, we'll get some mosquito relief around here. I totally get it. But this is a daily thing though, in regards to checking that grill front, right? I mean, you should be doing this daily to prevent it ever from kind of building up, right?
Absolutely, and and even if you miss a day or two or something like that, but at minimum you've got to be looking at that stuff. That's because that's a critical part of keeping that engine, at the optimal levels, temperature levels, and everything they need to be. So, and that's where it all starts. That airflow getting in there. So.
By the way, Kevin, really quickly, Dave Nemo jumped into the chat on YouTube to let you know that the mosquito is the state bird of Louisiana. He just wanted to let you know that. so
is that kind of like the trampoline state bird of Alabama? When the winds blow.
I hadn't heard that. I had never heard that before.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I will actually terrorize my relatives with that bit of information too. By the way, so we're checking the grill, but we're also checking the radiator daily, right? Can we kind of talk about a lot of these new trucks have some newfangled technology inside of the radiator, right?
They do, and not necessarily newfangled technology, but just in the way that they flow the coolant through there. And a lot of that, I know last week I touched on some of these newer engines, the actual amount of coolant that flows through that system, the flow amounts are just, off the charts on certain engines. So it's kind of crazy. The amount of coolant that passes through these little passageways and everything, So they are designed so much different to be more efficient, at the heat exchange. So, and that's one reason it is so critical that any obstruction from that airflow across that radiator is going to start creating, nothing else but hot spots in certain points of that radiator. And, once that happens, those hot spots, what can happen can actually, the temperature, not instead of decreasing, in the coolant as the air flows across, but because the air doesn't flow across because of a flow restriction and airflow restriction, now the coolant actually stays that hot. And when it hits these turns and the pressure and the amount of flow pushing behind it hits these turns and things, it can actually start melting some of the solder and stuff that help put these things together. And that's where you start developing these little bitty leaks because, again, most of the modern radiators, you're dealing with different types of aluminum and different metal alloys mating up with plastics and things like that. So you've got those different expansion and contraction rates as temperature changes. So the engineering behind some of this stuff and how they put it together and these things last like they do, to me is just amazing. You know, there's some engineers come up with some really good ways of creating and keeping these things working as well as they do nowadays. And you know, I guess they should. You know, as expensive as a lot of these components are,
Yeah,
it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you should be. Yeah, you should be in charge of having to kind of refigure faulty equipment. I mean, you know, it's bad. It's hard enough keeping up with all the stuff you have to do. Let me kind of set the table here for what Kevin Lindsey's been kind of doing this morning here. By the way, guys, if you notice, it's all interconnected. You need to make sure you've got the right coolant, and at the same time, making sure that you're checking for leaks. The combination of that is, in and of itself, foundationally going to make sure that your system is running pretty good. If you're actually checking the grill to make sure it's not getting clogged. That trifecta, and along with the maintenance of checking the protection levels at every service, should keep you in good stead. We're also talking about the technology behind this. Kevin, you did a pretty good job last time. I will say this, that despite my best efforts to take you off into the weeds, your discussion of coolant flow and the discussion of what the DEF tanks do in the winter was pretty darn good. But I did want to talk about, in the limited time we have, and we can get back to coolant flow in a second, possible reasons for coolant loss when you don't have visible leaks, where you should check. When you've done your diligence, check the area for leaks and can't seem to find any. Where can you check next?
Well, one thing to keep in mind, and this is one of those things you kind of have to think of from that, 30,000 foot level or whatever. But anytime there's a leak, on an engine and nothing is visible, there's nothing physical you can see leaking on the outside of the engine, dripping down or anything, but yet you've got the coolant loss, you've got the oil loss, things like that. Think about this. What component in these engines do these two different systems, these fluid systems, whether it's fuel, oil, coolant, where do they come together at? And I'll even throw in air, because we got air compressors that actually run in oil, from the engine oil, and are cooled. The head is cooled by the cooling system, with coolant. So, but then they're building air pressure for the brake system. So you've got all these different things that kind of come together. Think about what system has the most pressure. So like for a cooling system, if you got oil pressure on your truck that's running 40 psi, so your cooling system pressure cap is 15 psi. That's why we'll see oil in the coolant more often than coolant in the oil. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, it does. It does. I don't know if it would have made sense if we hadn't had the entire conversation we've had up to this point, but it makes sense now. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So that, and that's what I mean, that's that kind of high level view. You got to think about, at what point do these systems overlap, or, what component in the engine do these systems, fuel, coolant, fuel and coolant, or coolant and oil, or even fuel and oil, right? So when we start looking at that, you're dealing with a coolant loss or something like that, but there's no obvious leaks anywhere. Well, it's going somewhere, obviously, right? And chances are, since the cooling system is typically the lowest of those pressures at 15 psi as far as system pressure on most trucks, then usually listening. The other systems have higher pressures, so even the air, oil, or fuel get into the cooling system, depending, right? So that's one way to look. But if the coolant's coming out, then that means it's leaking somewhere where there is no pressure, which most of the time that's crankcase, because the crankcase pressure is less than cooling pressure. So it's not pressurized oil in an oil galley inside the engine. And that's usually from O-rings around the liner, things like that, where the coolant flow is so heavy around that liner, and the heat and that coolant can drip through those O-rings down into the oil pan. So, start really checking all your fluid levels. Hey, my oil looks a little funny, but I'm actually making oil. Yeah, an engine's not going to make oil by itself. Either fuel or coolant's getting it, right? So that's one of those other things. You kind of tie it all together, as you're checking things. So and pay attention. Pay attention. Hey, when I checked this oil last week, I was about half a gallon low, and now I'm above the full mark.
That's a problem. Yeah, it's like basically, I don't know what,
Yeah.
at what point, it's like, at what point do we have to call Texaco in here to start drilling for oil inside my own truck,
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, let's watch that. we know that if that engine can make oil, you can make some money with it, right?
Oh my God, yeah. And by the way, it's one of those things that reminds me, and it reminds everybody, your engine, the components of your engine, all the different places that we're talking about here need to work together. They don't need to mix together. That's the big difference. I mean, that's what.
Absolutely.
That's
right?
what people forget.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what ends up happening is the fact that it's a difference between of it being like a relay race and it being like a rugby scrum is the best way to kind of think about it. You want people handing the baton off to the next thing that's supposed to do the next thing. What you don't want is it all just in one big soup, because we all know what one big soup is. It's gumbo, and then you're surrounded by mosquitoes. Kevin Lindsey, we're out of time, brother. That's it. I mean, we did our diligence, though. I allowed you to run this sequence properly as opposed to taking you in the weeds, and I'm always reminded why it's a master class. Well done, sir. Well done.
Well done on your part.
Oh, well, thank you, man. Guys, you all know Kevin. He is the manager of technical service over at Travel Centers of America. Guys, please go to ta-petro.com. We're so thrilled to have him here on a regular basis, and it's always so informative. Kevin, I will let you get out of here, and this time you haven't left anything on the table, brother. We'll talk next week.
All right. Sounds good.